On the outskirts of Salem, Oregon, sits an abandoned carnival that's been closed since 1987. Midnight Circus was once the most popular traveling carnival on the West Coast until a horrific accident claimed the lives of 8 people during the final show of the season. My investigation team, Jessica, paranormal researcher with 12 years experience, Daniel, a gifted medium who specializes in tragic deaths, Katie, a professional camera specialist, and Tom, advanced audio engineer, decided to explore the carnival grounds on Halloween night, exactly 36 years after the devastating tragedy. The carnival grounds looked like a scene from a post-apocalyptic nightmare. The massive Ferris wheel stood frozen against the gray sky, its rusted cars swaying ominously in the October wind. Faded red and yellow circus tents hung in moth-eaten tatters, revealing broken wooden bleachers underneath. Carnival games lay scattered across the muddy ground, ring toss bottles, stuffed animal prizes slowly rotting in the elements. Most disturbing was the fun house at the far end. Its painted clown face entrance grinned maniacally despite decades of weather damage, the colors faded but still somehow menacing. According to yellowed local newspaper archives we'd researched extensively, the accident happened during the grand finale performance when an electrical fire started in the main tent during a thunderstorm. 8 performers, 5 talented acrobats from a family circus dynasty, 2 beloved clowns who'd entertained children for decades, and the charismatic ringmaster died trying to evacuate over 200 audience members to safety. The carnival owner, devastated by overwhelming guilt, abandoned everything overnight and disappeared forever. "I can sense them immediately," Daniel said as we carefully entered the main performance area, stepping over broken boards and rusted tent stakes. "Multiple spirits are definitely still here, but they're not malicious or angry. They're performing? Like they're eternally putting on shows for invisible audiences." We methodically set up our sophisticated equipment near the center ring, where the fatal fire had originally started. The ground was still stained black in some places. At exactly 11 p.m., supernatural activity began with incredible intensity. Vintage carnival music started playing from absolutely nowhere. Old-fashioned circus melodies echoing hauntingly through the empty grounds, complete. "Look up at the trapeze ring," Katie whispered, focusing her high-definition camera toward the top of the tent. The trapeze swings were moving in perfect synchronization, as if invisible acrobats were performing their death-defying routine with flawless precision. We could hear the distinctive whoosh of bodies flying through the air, the squeak of ropes, and even the chalk dust being clapped from hands, but saw nothing except the mysteriously moving equipment. Tom's sensitive audio equipment was picking up thunderous applause and cheering from an invisible audience of hundreds. "It's absolutely incredible," he said in complete amazement. "It's like they're still performing the exact show that never got to finish properly." Then we saw them clearly, translucent, shimmering figures of the 8 performers materializing slowly in the center ring. The acrobats were flying through the air with impossible grace and beauty, defying gravity as they performed triple somersaults and catches. The 2 clowns were juggling balls of pure light while doing elaborate pratfalls that made us laugh despite our fear. The distinguished ringmaster stood proudly in the center ring, his arms raised dramatically toward a crowd that existed only in spiritual memory. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the greatest show on earth. Prepare to witness miracles." The performance was absolutely breathtakingly beautiful and professionally executed. For 20 magnificent minutes, we watched these spirits recreate their final show with perfect precision, passion, and pure joy. They weren't trapped, suffering, or angry. They were doing exactly what they had loved most in life, entertaining people and bringing wonder to the world. But suddenly we smelled acrid smoke and heard crackling flames. The phantom fire was starting again, replaying the tragedy. The performers looked directly at us with urgent, determined expressions on their translucent faces. "They want us to witness something crucial," Daniel translated their spiritual communication. They want to show us what really happened that terrible night. We watched in awe as the 8 spirit performers immediately stopped their show and began guiding invisible audience members to safety with incredible bravery. They formed human chains, carried children, and helped elderly people escape. The ringmaster was the very last to leave, making absolutely sure every single person had escaped safely before the tent collapsed entirely on top of him in a blaze of heroic sacrifice. "They're not victims," Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. "They're genuine heroes who died saving over 200 lives." The spirits gathered together in the center ring and took a final graceful bow to us. The ringmaster removed his top hat respectfully and spoke directly to our hearts with profound dignity. "Thank you for remembering our sacrifice and witnessing our truth. Now our real story can finally be told to the world." With that, brilliant golden lights filled the entire carnival grounds. The spirits smiled warmly and waved goodbye before dissolving into thousands of sparkles of light that rose majestically toward the stars above. The next morning, we immediately contacted local historians, journalists, and the mayor's office. Our incredible footage became undeniable evidence that these weren't just tragedy victims, they were legitimate heroes who died saving hundreds of lives. Within 6 months, a beautiful memorial was erected in their honor, complete with their names and the words, "Heroes of the Midnight Circus." The carnival grounds became completely peaceful after that transformative night. Local visitors reported feeling pure joy, wonder, and inspiration there instead of sadness or fear. The 8 performers had finally received the recognition and respect they truly deserved, and their spirits found eternal rest, knowing their heroic sacrifice would never be forgotten by future generations. Sometimes ghosts aren't seeking revenge or crying desperately for help. Sometimes they just want their true story told accurately, their heroism remembered properly, and their legacy honored with the dignity they earned through ultimate sacrifice.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now, before the next nightmare finds you.
On a secluded stretch of beach in Northern California, there's a luxury resort called Ocean View Paradise that stays completely empty during the off-season months. Local surfers and fishermen claim that on full moon nights, a woman's ghost walks along the moonlit shoreline, searching for something she lost. Our investigation team, me, Isabel, experienced psychic medium, Miguel, local guide and folklore expert, and Kevin, a professional equipment handler, went to investigate during November's full moon weekend. Resort manager Mr. Rodriguez gave us reluctant permission after much convincing. But please, I'm warning you, don't venture onto the beach after sunset, he said seriously. Strange things happen here when darkness falls. The tragic story was that 3 years ago, a young woman named Jessica Martinez came alone for a weekend retreat to clear her head after a difficult breakup. On her first night, she mysteriously disappeared from her beachfront room. Her body was never recovered, but authorities quickly assumed she drowned while walking alone at night. We positioned ourselves on the sandy beach until 10 p.m., setting up sensitive recording equipment. The Pacific waves were unusually calm. Stars were brilliantly bright, absolutely perfect conditions for paranormal investigation. Isabel immediately sensed an unsettling presence watching us from somewhere nearby. At exactly 11:30, we spotted a solitary figure in the distance, walking slowly along the water's edge. She wore a flowing white dress and had long, dark hair that moved in the ocean breeze. The figure matched Jessica's physical description perfectly from missing person reports. "She's definitely here with us tonight," Isabel whispered, getting goosebumps. "But she's not at peace. Something extremely traumatic happened to her on this beach." We cautiously approached the apparition. The ghostly figure became clearer and more defined. A strikingly beautiful woman, but her face looked deeply sad and desperate, as if pleading for help. When we got within 20 feet, the ghostly figure suddenly vanished completely, but fresh human footprints remained clearly visible in the wet sand. Bare feet, definitely a woman's size, leading toward the rocky cliffs. Miguel's professional metal detector began beeping urgently at the exact same spot. We carefully dug into the sand and discovered a tarnished silver bracelet engraved with J.M. Forever Young, clearly Jessica's personal jewelry. "Jessica," I called out loudly toward the ocean, "we found your bracelet. Are you trying to communicate something important to us?" Suddenly, powerful winds picked up from nowhere. The previously calm waves became violent and aggressive, crashing against the shore. Letters mysteriously appeared in the disturbed sand, as if written by an invisible finger. "Murdered." Temperature dropped dramatically. Isabel began having intense psychic visions. Her boyfriend followed her here. They had a violent argument on these rocks. He pushed her during the fight, and she hit her head on the sharp stones. He dumped her body far out in the ocean. Most shocking revelation, the boyfriend was still alive, had moved to another state, and had even remarried. Police never conducted a proper investigation, simply assuming accidental drowning without examining evidence. Jessica's restless spirit had been seeking justice for 3 long years. We immediately provided our evidence to local authorities. The investigation was reopened, leading to the boyfriend's eventual confession and arrest. After justice was served, Jessica's ghost completely disappeared from the beach. Finally, she found the peace she'd been desperately seeking.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you.
In downtown Portland, there's an antique shop called Yesterday's Treasures, where we heard about a haunted doll that terrorized every family who took it home. The elderly shop owner, Mr. Peterson, was extremely reluctant to discuss the mysterious doll. "That doll is definitely cursed," he finally admitted after much persuasion. "Everyone who buys it brings it back within a week, absolutely terrified. Some people won't even come back into my shop." My specialized team, Vera, a demonologist with 20 years experience, Ryan, tech support and EMF specialist, and Chloe, professional camera operator, got special permission to investigate the doll overnight in a controlled environment. The doll's name was Annabelle, a Victorian-era porcelain doll dressed in a faded blue velvet dress with tiny pearl buttons. She had curly blonde hair and rosy painted cheeks. But her glass eyes, they looked disturbingly real and seemed to follow you around the room. "I feel extremely uncomfortable near her," Vera said immediately upon entering the room. "There's powerful dark energy attached to this doll. Something tragic happened to bind a spirit here." We placed Annabelle in an isolated back room with multiple infrared cameras positioned at different angles. For the first 2 hours, absolutely nothing unusual happened. But after 2 a.m., supernatural activity began escalating rapidly. The doll's glass eyes slowly moved from left to right, tracking our movements around the room. Ryan's EMF detector showed dangerously high electromagnetic readings. Room temperature dropped 15 degrees instantly, and our breath became visible. "Annabelle," I addressed her directly, speaking calmly, "are you here with us tonight?" The K2 meter immediately lit up with all 5 lights, an extremely strong affirmative response. "Are you trying to communicate something important to us?" Again, the device showed maximum response, indicating desperate communication attempts. Then, the most shocking paranormal event occurred. The doll's porcelain head slowly turned 180 degrees toward our main camera, maintaining direct eye contact. Chloe screamed in absolute terror and abandoned her equipment. Vera conducted an intensive spirit communication session. A 6-year-old girl's soul named Lucy is trapped inside this doll. She died of tuberculosis in 1884, and her grief-stricken parents commissioned the doll as a memorial. Suddenly, objects throughout the room began levitating simultaneously. Pens, papers, small decorative items floating in midair, defying gravity. The doll's painted lips were moving silently, as if desperately trying to speak to us. Lucy wants to go home to her family. Vera translated the spiritual communication. She's been trapped in that doll for 140 years and is tired of being alone. The most terrifying moment came when Annabelle suddenly stood up from her wooden chair and slowly walked toward us with mechanical, deliberate steps, exactly like a real child learning to walk. We evacuated immediately in complete panic. Mr. Peterson later revealed the doll's tragic history. Lucy's wealthy parents believed her spirit would live on through the memorial doll, but instead trapped her soul permanently.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out, so subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you.
In the Nevada desert, 50 miles from Las Vegas, there's an abandoned railway track from the old mining boom days. Locals claim that every full moon night, a ghost train appears on those rusted rails, carrying passengers who never reach their final destination. Me and my team, Nathan, railway historian, Zoe, paranormal investigator, and Brad, video specialist, went to investigate on October's full moon night. We'd heard the stories for years, but never believed them until tonight. The abandoned track stretched for miles through the barren desert. The rails were completely rusted and covered with tumbleweeds, with weeds growing between the railroad ties. But surprisingly, the steel infrastructure was still intact after 70 years of neglect. Nathan explained the tragic history as we set up our equipment. In 1952, the Desert Rose passenger train derailed at this exact location during a fierce sandstorm, killing over 180 people. The locomotive and 3 passenger cars tumbled down a steep embankment, trapping victims in twisted metal. At 11 p.m. sharp, we positioned ourselves at the accident site. The desert was completely silent, except for the eerie whistling of wind through old telegraph poles and scattered debris from the original wreck. At exactly 11:30, Zoe began feeling strange vibrations through the ground. "Something's coming," she said nervously, checking her EMF detector. "The electromagnetic field is going crazy." Suddenly, a bright headlight appeared in the distance, cutting through the desert darkness. At first, it looked like truck headlights on a distant highway, but it was moving directly along the abandoned track, and we could hear the distinct rhythmic sound of a steam engine building pressure. "Holy shit," Brad whispered, frantically adjusting his camera focus. "That's an actual train approaching us." But as the locomotive got closer, we realized it was semi-transparent. We could see desert stars and mountains through the engine and passenger cars. A complete phantom train with multiple cars moving at full speed toward our location. The ghost train slowed down exactly where we were standing. Through the foggy windows, we saw the faces of passengers, men, women, and children, all dressed in 1950s clothing. Some were crying desperately. Others looked confused and lost, as if they didn't understand what had happened to them.
Brad's main camera completely malfunctioned as the train passed directly through our position, but his backup audio equipment recorded everything perfectly. Children crying for their parents, people screaming in terror, and the horrific sound of metal twisting and cars crashing. The most terrifying moment came when a uniformed conductor leaned out from the train and waved directly at us, as if inviting us to board them for their eternal journey to nowhere. Zoe suddenly fainted from the overwhelming spiritual energy. When she regained consciousness 10 minutes later, the phantom train had completely vanished into the desert night. But on the rusted track, fresh locomotive wheel marks remained clearly visible until sunrise. Nathan later confirmed the accident happened at exactly 11:45 p.m. on October 15, 1952. Train number 847, traveling from Los Angeles to Denver, never reached its destination.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out, so subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you.
On the outskirts of Salem, there stands a mansion that's been empty for over a century. They call it Darkwood Manor. Local folklore says a wealthy businessman murdered his wife there in a fit of jealous rage back in the 1890s. Our team of 5, me, lead investigator, Sarah, psychic medium, Tyler, tech specialist, Emma, camera operator, and David, historian, planned to spend the entire night investigating the notorious mansion. The building itself was intimidating. Gothic architecture with broken shutters hanging like dead eyes. Overgrown ivy covered most of the structure, and the front door creaked ominously in the wind. The iron gates were rusted shut, as if keeping something inside rather than keeping people out. The moment Sarah stepped inside the grand foyer, she felt uncomfortable. "There's heavy negative energy here," she said, rubbing her arms. "A female spirit, and she's very angry about something that happened long ago." We explored the basement first, finding an old wine cellar that smelled of decay and dampness. Suddenly, our thermal camera showed a cold spot, perfectly human-shaped, moving slowly between the wine racks. Temperature in that specific area dropped to near freezing, while the rest of the room remained normal. Catherine Morrison. Sarah went into a deep trance, her voice changing completely. "She's telling me that William Morrison strangled her here in 1895. She discovered his affair with their housemaid. That's when wine bottles started falling from the shelves, one by one, crashing to the stone floor, red wine spreading like blood." We were all terrified, but fascinated. Emma's camera was shaking in her hands, but she kept filming everything. Upstairs in the master bedroom, we found actual physical evidence, an old leather diary hidden behind loose floorboards, written in feminine handwriting. The pages were yellowed, but still readable. The last entry was dated October 13, 1895. "William is becoming violent with his accusations. I fear for my life. If something happens to me, know that he did this to silence me forever." At that exact same moment, Tyler's ghost box crackled with a clear, desperate voice. "He strangled me, right here on this bed." Suddenly, the heavy bedroom door slammed shut with tremendous force. We were trapped inside. Temperature dropped dramatically. Antique mirrors began cracking in spiderweb patterns. Emma's camera was shaking in her hands, but she kept filming everything. "Catherine, we understand your pain," I called out loudly, trying to stay calm. "We'll help you get justice. Tell us what happened." The door slowly creaked open, but when we tried to leave the mansion, the main gate was somehow locked from the inside. The caretaker later swore he'd locked up from the outside and left hours ago. The evidence was undeniable.
Catherine Morrison was still seeking justice after 128 years.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you.
In the mountains of Colorado sits an abandoned school that's been empty since 1975, Pinewood Elementary School. Legend says a teacher poisoned 6 students with contaminated milk before taking her own life with the same poison. The school has been considered cursed ever since that tragic day. Our investigation team, me, Alex, paranormal researcher, Luna, a medium, and Chris, cameraman, arrived in late October, just before Halloween, when paranormal activity is said to be at its peak. The school building looked absolutely terrifying from the outside. Broken windows with jagged glass hanging like teeth, overgrown ivy crawling up the brick walls, and a rusted "Danger Keep Out" sign swinging from the main entrance gate. The ground floor classrooms still had rows of old wooden desks and blackboards covered in decades of dust. Children's artwork still hung on some walls, faded and curling at the edges. Luna immediately sensed multiple children's presence throughout the building. I can hear them. Children's voices echoing through these halls. They're scared and confused, Luna whispered, tears forming in her eyes. Suddenly, in classroom 4B, a piece of chalk began moving across the blackboard by itself. Slowly, deliberately, words appeared in shaky handwriting. "Help us, please." Alex's EMF meter was going off constantly, beeping frantically. "We're getting massive electromagnetic activity throughout this entire floor," he reported, checking his readings twice. On the second floor in the principal's office, we found a black and white photograph of Mrs. Helen Crawford, the teacher who was suspected of the poisoning. Her stern face stared at us from behind cracked glass. In front of her photo were wilted flowers and a yellowed note that read, "Forgive me, children. I thought I was saving you." That's when the old school bell suddenly rang 3 times. But there had been no electricity in the building for decades. The haunting sound echoed through the empty corridors like a call to class that would never come. On the 3rd floor, in the chemistry lab, we discovered the actual poison bottle still intact after all these years, sitting on dusty shelves like deadly museum pieces. Luna suddenly screamed and collapsed. "Helen is here! She's filled with guilt and regret." Temperature plummeted, and we saw her, a woman's shadow in a white dress, moving frantically through the laboratory, knocking over beakers and test tubes. "Mrs. Crawford," I said, boldly, trying to control my fear. "Why did you do it? Why did you hurt those innocent children?" The ghost box crackled with a clear, tormented response. "They were going to suffer anyway. Abusive homes. I saved them." Suddenly, lab equipment started falling and crashing. We could smell dangerous chemicals mixing in the air. We immediately evacuated the building, running through the corridors as children's laughter echoed behind us.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you.
At 2 a.m. sharp, me and my team entered Blackwood General Hospital. This place had been closed for 20 years after a devastating fire killed 15 patients.
Locals swore their spirits still wandered these halls, seeking help that never came. My EMF detector went crazy the moment we stepped inside the lobby. Temperature dropped 15 degrees instantly. "Guys, something is definitely here," I whispered to my crew. Camera operator Jake's hands were trembling as he adjusted the night vision settings. The hospital corridors were pitch black, with broken wheelchairs and medical equipment scattered everywhere. Peeling paint hung from the walls like dead skin. The smell of decay and old smoke still lingered after all these years. The moment we reached the third floor, we heard it, a woman crying somewhere down the hallway. But as we followed the sound, it kept moving away from us, leading us deeper into the darkness. Then the elevator started running by itself. Empty elevator going up and down between floors over and over, as if carrying invisible passengers. "Dude, I'm out of here," Marcus, our sound engineer, was completely spooked. His recording equipment was picking up sounds we couldn't hear. But I convinced the team to stay a little longer, promising we'd leave if things got worse. In room 237, where most patients had died, our main camera suddenly shut down without explanation. But through our backup night vision camera, we saw it, a shadow figure sitting on the old hospital bed. Clear silhouette, definitely human-shaped, rocking back and forth. I slowly approached, my heart pounding. "Hello? Is someone there? We're here to help," I called out softly. Suddenly, the bed springs compressed as if something heavy sat down. Temperature plummeted so low we could see our breath forming clouds. Medical charts on the wall started fluttering without any wind. Then a voice, weak, desperate, whispering, "Help me, please." Our backup camera recorded everything perfectly, but when we reviewed the footage later, along with that haunting voice, we could clearly see a face. An elderly woman with severe burns covering half her face, her eyes filled with pain and confusion. We ran out of that hospital in pure terror, abandoning some of our equipment. Next day, research revealed that a 67-year-old woman named Eleanor Williams died in room 237 during the fire. She had been trapped for hours, calling for help that never came. The face we captured matched her old medical photo perfectly. Now I believe some souls get trapped after traumatic deaths. Eleanor was still waiting for help even 20 years later. That night changed how I view the paranormal forever.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now, before the next nightmare finds you.